you want to sit right here? Or you want to sit right there? Boom.
Wait. Is it 6:30 already?
Oh.
Woo! Well, it's time to start. Everybody grab a seat. We're glad you're here. Find a seat on a chair. Come on in. Use the rail. Don't fall down. Run away. Run away. We got it.
There we go.
Hi, how are you? Yeah, you're looking good.
We're singing tonight. Yep, it's replaced.
Well, good evening.
Good evening.
Everybody excited to be here? Is everybody excited to be here? Is everybody excited to be here? Good. We're gonna mix some things up tonight. We're gonna do some things a little different. But before we do, who was here the Sunday night? Raise your hand and say, "Beep." Who was here last night? Who's here tonight? Good. We're glad you're here. We're going to sing some songs, and then we're going to have some class. We're going to go to class and have some crafts. And I think, listen, we talked about Paul and on the road to Damascus the first night. Last night, what happened to Paul last night? Just say it out. He went to jail. So, and tonight, he's going to stand on trial before probably three different rulers, Felix, Festus, and Agrippa. And so maybe you'll learn about some or all of those tonight. But before we do, I'm going to turn it over to Dalton, who is going to lead our singing tonight.
All right. Yeah. Let's see, am I got my on? All right, here we go. All right, I need y'all to repeat after me. It's repeat after me song. All right, y'all ready? I'll say a word. I'll say some words. You just repeat them right back to me. Down by the river. I took a little walk. I met up with the devil. We had a little talk. I pushed him in the river. I hung him on the line. We can beat the devil any old time. Ha, 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 ho. There we go. We'll work on that one. All righty. I need y'all one more time. Okay, one more time. Repeat after me. Down by the river. I took a little walk. I met up with the devil. We had a little talk. I pushed him in the river. I hung him on the line. We can beat the devil any old time. Ha, 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 ho. There we go. Good job. All right, he's all stand up for this one. God needs men and women to go out and work for him. So we're going to do the Lord's Army. And I got a couple different versions of this, but just follow along with me. I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never follow the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir! I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir! I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir! I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot love. Alrighty? He invites us into his banquet table, his banner over us is love. He invites us into his banquet table, his banner over us is love. He invites us into his banquet table, his banner over us is love. His banner over us is love. Alrighty, y'all want to try them again? What? No. No. All right, we got to try it again. We have to try it again. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. He invites us into his banquet table. His banner over us is love. He invites us into his banquet table. His banner over us is love. He invites us into his banquet table. His banner over us is love. His banner over us is love. That one's a little tricky for me sometimes still. Alrighty, let's see. I got another repeat after me song. This is one I learned a long time ago. Y'all ready? Y'all got to repeat after me. From east to west. From east to west. Jesus Christ is the best. Jesus Christ is the best. From east to west. From east to west. Jesus Christ is the best. Jesus Christ is the best. Na 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 na. Na 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 na. Na 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 na. Na 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 na. From day to day. From day to day. Jesus Christ is the way. Jesus Christ is the way. From day to day. Jesus Christ is the way. Jesus Christ is the way. Na 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 na. Na 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 na. Na 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 na. Na 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 na. From hour to hour. Jesus Christ has the power. From hour to hour. Jesus Christ has the power. Na 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 na. Na 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 na. Na 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 na. Na 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 na. Alrighty, I think we got time for one more. Brandon? Oh, I don't even know if I know that one anymore. I used to. I know what you're talking about. I'm sorry, I don't think I remember that one. Father Abraham? Okay, alright guys, stand up, stand up. Father Abraham had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. So let's all praise the Lord. Right arm, Father Abraham had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. So let's all praise the Lord. Right arm, left arm, Father Abraham had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. So let's all praise the Lord. Right arm, left arm, right foot, Father Abraham had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. So let's all praise the Lord. Right arm, right foot, Father Abraham had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. So let's all praise the Lord. Right arm, right foot, spin around. Father Abraham had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. So let's all praise the Lord. Right foot, spin around, tongue out. I am class, we're going to say a quick prayer and see if I can see straight for a second. I'm very dizzy now. Whew. We're going to say a quick prayer, and then we'll dismiss from the youngest to oldest like we have been every night. So let's fold our hands together. Let's close our eyes. Let's bow our heads. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for VBS and what it means to all of us, God, just to have some fun and to learn more about you and to become more like little children. And we see why you've told us that. You've told us in your word, God, to become more like children. We understand exactly where you're coming from. I thank you for these kids here. I pray that you'll bless them and their families. I pray that they will learn more about you, that they will seek you first in everything that they do. I thank you for Central Church of Christ and everything that they do for the community. God, I pray that you will just help us to grow closer to you in everything that we do. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All righty. Here we go.
Well, good evening. I'm not as tired now as I was last couple of nights. I still sang, but I didn't have to have all the energy. Dalton and I were talking the other day. Will's not in here to whatever, but Will is 35 and Dalton is 23. You add them together, that's 2 years more. 2 years older than I am. That's just plain out scary. All right. Tonight we're going to try to cover 3 chapters in the book of Acts. Chapter 24, chapter 25, and chapter 26. But I'm not going to read all the chapters. Instead, I'm just going to kind of give you an overview, and you can fill in the gaps as you read. But I'm just going to kind of talk through what's going on and mention some things. And then as we get to the end, then we'll get to some of these questions. And I remind you, the questions are exactly that. They're just questions to kind of get you thinking about the text and how it relates to us in life today. And as we go through this, I think you'll see some of that as we go along. Now, let's go through the book of Acts. Paul has been going in and out of different places. He's been on these missionary journeys, going to different places, going to different towns, going to different cities, establishing churches, going back to visit churches. And it seems like many places, if not everywhere he goes, there is a group of Jews who sometimes seems to come in and follow him, and they're from different parts of the empire, and they are always causing trouble for Paul, right? Y'all remember that reading through the book of Acts. They're saying this or saying that. You know, these are the men that have turned the world upside down. You know, these are the men that whatever. This is and making life difficult for Paul and company. And those are the things that have been going on. It gets to the point that it's really kind of boiling over, I suppose. They're beginning to see the Jewish leaders, those that are very like Paul was in the beginning, see that this way of Christ, these followers of Christ, these Christians, as they started to call them, were not going away. The more they persecuted them, the more whatever. And Paul seemed to be one who was spearheading a lot of this, especially throughout the Roman Empire. So there's a lot of effort and a lot of focus on Paul, it seems, in the book of Acts. Now, there were others. Remember, James was put to death, so there were others that were put to death. Stephen was stoned. Others were martyred in that way. And you can pick up, Justin's Book of Martyrs, and you can read how tradition says most of the apostles died in some form of persecution. So it was going on for everybody, but we know more about what's going on with Paul because of the book of Acts. Paul has gone to Jerusalem, and in Jerusalem he's accused by the leaders, and they arrest him, so to speak. They're going to kill him because of their anger at him and what he's doing. A captain, a ruler, or a centurion of the guard, a Roman officer named Lysias, stops it and puts Paul securely on his way to Caesarea. And now we find Saul in Acts chapter 24 in Caesarea, being held in Herod's palace under house arrest. He is on trial. He is on house arrest, but he is in Herod's palace. Most people consider that's where he is. So while he's there, the leading Jews, Ananias the high priest, and the leaders of the Jews come to Caesarea to stand before Felix, the governor of the province, to tell them why Paul is being held. And they bring with them a man by the name of Tertullus. Most versions say Tertullus was an orator or an attorney. He was someone who was well-spoken. He could turn a phrase. He could hold your attention. And when you read Acts chapter 24, you see him doing just that. He is trying to hold Felix spellbound by his ability to speak. And so that's his goal. That's his mission. Probably most people think he was a Hellenist. That would be a Roman or a Greek who had become a Jew, so he was familiar with both Roman and Greek culture and Jewish culture. So being familiar with the law, he would be able to turn things and say things in that way. So he sets up Paul as the disruptor of the peace. Because after all, one of the things that Felix and the governors of these provinces wanted was to keep peace. Because if you kept peace, then Rome would not come in and take over. Rome would not come in and make your life miserable. You would have pretty much freedom to do and rule the way you wanted to. So the more peaceful your province was, the better it was for you. So Tertullus comes in and he says, Felix, this man Paul is a problem. He is a disruptor of the peace. But here's something that the Bible does not tell us, but history does. This is one of those flattering moments that Tertullus, as an orator, is using. Because history tells us, people like Tacitus record that Felix was just the opposite of peaceful. That he would often incite problems in order to squelch out those he disagreed with. So he would put people in place in order to make a problem so he could squelch the problem and show how powerful and keep people under his thumb. So he was actually one who did not keep peace but created problems in order to show that he was doing his job. Josephus adds that the Jews sent word to Nero at one point and said to Nero, or sent complaints to Nero about Felix, saying that Felix was flagrantly agitating them, that he was causing them trouble, wasn't letting them be Jewish people and letting them follow their own laws. And so under the Roman rule, the Romans didn't come around and just take over your nation and take over your place. They would come and they say, look, we want you to be a part of Rome, and we have conquered you, so you're going to be part of Rome. And you'll have all the blessings of being a part of Rome, the trade routes and other benefits, if you will just follow our laws and follow our rules. You can even worship your own gods. So they were a nation of freedom of religion, They were a nation that said, look, you just do what you want to do. You just pay tribute to us. And as long as you're paying tribute, and we'll take care of you in this way and that way. And Judea, being an outlying province, was probably less under Roman rule than some of the other areas. And they were left alone as long as there were no problems. So when you had someone like Felix, the Jews would send to Nero and say, hey, look, something's got to give here. He's doing more. He's being ruthless in a way that you would not appreciate. Tertullus goes on and he tries to appeal to Felix's tendency to deal with insurrectionists. So Felix would stir them up, and then he would take care of the insurrectionists. So he says Paul is a troublemaker, and he's been a troublemaker all over Judea. In fact, he is a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarene. Now, that word sect, some people suggest that maybe a better word there is heresy. The way they use that word sect in that case, the word behind the word sect in that case, communicates the idea of someone who's being heretical. So he is a ringleader of that heretical idea of this Nazarene. Who's the Nazarene? Jesus, the Christ. He used the term Nazarene. Why would he use the term Nazarene? Okay. Nothing good comes out of Nazareth. So it's a put down. The heresy of that no-gooder, do no gooder, do no good doer. What's the word? A ne'er-do-well. That doesn't, and he's part of that, and he's a ringleader of that, and he's a troublemaker. In fact, he even tried to desecrate the temple, and we were going to take care of it until Lysias stepped in and stopped us. So this is a matter of our law, so let us take care of him. That is Tertullus' accusation and his request at the court of Felix. So Paul has his opportunity to speak. And so Paul just says in so many words, Felix, check the facts. You have the resources. You check the facts of what really happened. And you'll find out it's not everything that he said. In fact, I didn't come to cause trouble. I came to Jerusalem to worship. In fact, he was there. You might remember that when he was in different regions, he was collecting donations from all over the regions that he would travel so he could take them to Jerusalem because the Jerusalem church was facing a famine. So Paul was there primarily to bring back that relief that he had gathered from everywhere he had been. And while he was there, he went to the temple. And by the way, while he was there, we know that he even purified himself really to placate the Jews, to show that he was not against them. But they would have none of that. So they made up the fact that he would bring a Greek into the temple, which would defile and desecrate the temple, when in fact he had not. The accusers could not prove what they claim. But Paul does make a confession. Turn with me to Acts chapter 24. Acts 24, verse 14. But this I confess to you, that according to the way, which they call a sect, a heresy, I do serve the God of our fathers, Jewish fathers, believing everything that is in accordance with the law and is written in the prophets. Felix, I haven't done anything against the law and the prophets. I believe the law and the prophets. And everything I've done has been because of the law and the prophets. Because I have a hope in God for which these men are waiting. These people are waiting for the same thing I have been waiting for. That there shall certainly be a resurrection of both the righteous and the unrighteous. In view of this, I also do my best to maintain always a conscience without fault before God and before men. Now, after several years, I came to bring alms to my nation. Paul says, I came here on good terms. I came here to bring alms. I came here because this is my home, and I believe the law and the prophets, And I have the same hope in the resurrection that they do. Now, there's some points of contention, I suppose. They don't believe that Jesus is the Christ, and he does. They've been looking for the Messiah, and he says Jesus is, and they don't believe that. There's the difference. But other than that, he says, I believe everything they've believed. And I based everything I do on that. The real disturbance, he will go on to say, are these Jews from Asia that came in and caused the problem. And then Paul stops and looks around and says, where are they? You might remember there were 40 Jews that had determined they would eat nothing until Paul was put to death. Where are they? They're not there. They're not there to lay the accusation. He said, the only crime that I have committed is believing in the resurrection of the dead. And that's not a crime. So now Felix has to make a call here. Felix is looking, he's listened to Tertullus and the high priest. Now he's listened to Paul. So Felix, in so many ways, in so many words, declares that this is a religious issue, and he declines to rule and defers until Lysias can come, the Roman guard, and give his testimony. So Festus says, look, I'm not going to make a decision here because I don't have all the facts. I've heard both sides. This seems to be a religious issue, but I want to hear from Lysias before I make my ruling. And it says Felix had a more excellent knowledge of the way. He knew about the church. He knew about Christianity. He knew what was going on. He was not blind to what these people were doing. And he could have, based on that, released Paul. Because he knew what Paul was doing was not a crime. But because, like many rulers, he looks at the majority of the people and goes, I don't want to mess with the majority, so I'm going to the vocal majority, the squeaky wheel Jews. I'm not going to release him. I'm going to hold him under house arrest, at least until Lysias can come. So Paul is kept there. A few days later, Felix's wife, Drusilla, is with him. Now let me talk about Drusilla for a moment. The text says she is a Jewess. She is a woman who is a Jew. Now, does anybody know her family connections and who she is? Well, you will in a little bit. She is the great-granddaughter of the Herod that ruled when Jesus was born. Do you remember what that Herod did with little boys? He put them to death. Right? So that's her great-grandfather. Her great-uncle was Herod Agrippa, who killed John the Baptist. She's the daughter of the Agrippa that put James to death. She's the sister of the current Agrippa, who we'll meet in a minute. So when you hear that about her, what's your impression of her connection and her family and who she is? You hold her in high opinion or low opinion at this point? Pretty low opinion. But she has a history with the Jews, and that's why Felix probably knows a good bit about what's going on, because he is married to Drusilla, who knows all of this. This is a family often opposed to Christ and Christianity. So they listen to Paul as Paul talks about faith in Jesus Christ. And in verse 25 of Acts 24, but as he was discussing righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix became frightened, afraid, and replied, go away from the present. When I find time, I will call for you. When I find a more convenient season, a more convenient time, I'll call for you. Paul was talking about what? Righteousness, faith. Let me find it. Righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come. Why do you think Felix became a little bit afraid when he heard Paul talking about that? He had none of those. All right? He was not very righteous the way he treated people. And by the way, Drusilla was his wife after he took her from somebody she was previously married to when she was like 16 years old. He said, no, I want you as my wife, and as governor, he had that choice, and he did that. So, very unrighteous, lack of self-control person, and she comes from a family that's unrighteous and lacks self-control, And so now we have this whole situation, and now you understand why Felix goes, I really don't want to hear about this right now. I'll listen later. Hold that thought, because that may be one of the lessons, one of the things we talk about is if we have time as we get through this. All right, so time passes. We come to Acts chapter 25. It is now 2 years later. Felix, the governor, has been replaced by Festus, the governor. I sure wish they all didn't start with F's, because that gets confusing. So Felix is released as governor. Festus is now governor. And the chief priests say, hey, look, we have a new governor. Let's go to him in Jerusalem, and let's see if we can get him to take care of this Paul situation. We want Paul moved to Jerusalem. Now, there's a little parenthetical statement that Luke writes in there. They wanted Paul to be moved from Caesarea to Jerusalem because they had an ambush ready, a plan to ambush him and kill him on the road. Festus is not fooled. Festus is not, he wasn't born yesterday. He may have been born at night, but it wasn't last night. He knows what's going on. So he says, no, I'll tell you what, I'm going to go to Caesarea. So when I go to Caesarea, I'll hear him and I'll hear you. You bring your charges there. I'll listen and I'll make a call there. So 8 to 10 days later, Paul is on trial again. Similar situation. Again, Paul denies any sin or crime. He says, I have not sinned against the law of Moses. I did not desecrate the temple. So Festus seems to look at this again as a religious situation, a religious trial. So he says to Paul, Paul, would you consider going to Jerusalem to go there and be tried? Because this is a religious matter. That's the implication. What's Paul's answer? I appeal to Caesar. And a Roman citizen, he had that right. And so he says, I don't want this to be done in Jerusalem. Why do you think Paul said that? He's smart enough to know what's going on too. And, you know, in the courts today, when someone is being tried in a community or about to be tried in a community, sometimes the defense attorney will file for a change of venue. Why? I'm not going to get a fair trial here. Take me somewhere where people don't know what I've done. I mean, where people don't think they know what I've done. So Paul doesn't want a venue in Jerusalem where the jury, if there was one, is stacked against him. He wants a fair trial, and that's going to be more or less in Rome. It'd be more fair in Rome than it would be in Jerusalem, so I'm going to appeal to Caesar. So Festus's hands at this point are tied. So as Festus is sitting there over this, Agrippa comes into the picture now. And so he says to Agrippa, what do I do? I don't find any fault in him. Will you listen to what's going on here and you help me make a decision here as to what's right and how to handle this? So Agrippa and Bernice then are there in Caesarea, and Paul is brought before them. Now, let me tell you about Agrippa and Bernice. We know who Agrippa is. We know his sister is Drusilla. Do you know any of his other family? He has another sister. Her name is Bernice. And she happens to be his lover. This family is messed up. I mean, what's that old Ray Stevens song, I Am My Own Grandpa? I mean, it's worse than that. That's got all incestuous, unrighteous, lack of self-control, licentious, all those big words that mean terrible things, they have it. Yes, I think that is correct. They were of the lineage of Abraham through Esau, and they were put into power by Rome in order to rule over Jerusalem and in those areas. So yes, there's a whole bunch of messed up thing here, but that's the way the world was. We think the world is bad today. The world's been bad for a long time. It's messed up. And so now, Bernice, the sister Drusilla, and Agrippa's there, Now, Paul is brought in to give his defense. Now, when you read the text, the only person that I'm going to mention that I think was there that I don't necessarily read in the text, I'm reading by implication. Those that are there when Paul is brought out are Festus and maybe Drusilla, Agrippa, Bernice, the chief captains of the Roman army, and leading dignitaries. This is a royal court. The royal court's brought in, and then there's one other person, Paul, a prisoner. So can you imagine the spectacle here? Paul is brought in, likely in chains of some sort. He's brought in under guard at the very least. And he's standing before all these dignitaries, important army, militia, whatever, officials, a king and his consort, and a governor and his wife, likely. This is not just your normal gathering. So now he gives the defense again, and this is Acts chapter 20. Well, it's still the end of Acts chapter 25. Festus speaks, then he says, here is the man, and this is the Scott McCown version, here is the man that all the ruckus is about. He's not worthy of death. In fact, I am quite fond of him. Festus says, I like this guy. In fact, there's implications that he had hoped that Paul would give him a bribe so he could let him out. So he is here, and he's like, I like him. He's not worthy of death. So I want you to hear what's going on. So Acts chapter 26. Agrippa says, Paul, you have permission to speak for yourself. So Paul begins at the first part of chapter 26 on through about verse 22, 23 to tell his story. And he says in so many words, since I am accused, I am glad, Agrippa, that I get to stand before you. Because you know these things. You are an expert in Jewish customs. I mean, look at your lineage. Your father, your uncle, your grandfather, or great-grandfather, they were all rulers in Jerusalem. You know Jewish customs. You know Jewish laws. You know our traditions. You know all these things. These things haven't been done in secret. They've been done in open. So you know. So please listen to me patiently. In other words, Paul says, I'm about to tell you a long story. Sit and listen. The word patient there, the word translated patient there, carries the idea of being long-tempered. Don't lose your cool while I'm telling my story. Listen all the way through before you react. Because these Agrippas, many of them had tendencies to, if they didn't like something, to get really mad at it. They didn't like the way a story was going. They might lose their temper. They were rude, to put it nicely. So Paul says, just listen, and you'll understand. So he tells his story from his youth to being a persecutor of the way, to his conversion to following Christ, to being persecuted himself, and then accused and brought before for these trials. And as he's speaking, is that very familiar passage in chapter 26, verse 24, where Agrippa interrupts. Verse 24, Festus interrupts. While Paul was saying this in his defense, Festus said in a loud voice, Paul, you are out of your mind. Paul says, I'm not out of my mind, most excellent Festus, but I utter words of sober truth. And then he goes on, verse 27. Well, verse 26, the king knows about these matters. I speak to him with confidence. I'm persuaded that none of these things escape his notice, and that it's not been done in a corner. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know you believe. King Agrippa, I know you know what the prophets say. Do you believe them? I know you do. And then verse 28. King James Version, almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. Many of your modern speech translations say something along the lines of, in such a short time are you persuading me to become a Christian? No matter how you look at that, there's something that's reaching Agrippa at this point. Like Festus, who was frightened and concerned about what he heard. I think Agrippa's going, if you keep talking, I'm going to be one of you. You're going to convince me if you keep going. And that's when Paul replies, I wished all were like me except for these chains. Which means I wish everybody would follow Christ as I follow Christ. All right, what did I leave out of the story?
I just like Paul saw this new audience as the opportunity to present the gospel.
Yeah, Paul never uses these opportunities really to talk about Paul. He uses his story to talk about Christ. All right, so let's turn this to these questions that we have up here. We just have a few minutes, so let's not go through all of them. What are some of the morals or lessons that stand out to you as you read through this? If you were teaching a class like this, what would you say is something important? Go ahead, Randy. There's never a bad time to preach Christ. Yeah, even here, Paul is using these opportunities to talk about why he is what he is. Peter says in Peter chapter, be ready to give a defense for the hope that's within you. Yeah, verse 15, something like that. Yeah. So that being ready to give a defense, when I was growing up, I thought that meant I had to have all the answers. That's not what that means. That just means you be ready to tell people why you have hope. So when Paul is accused, he goes, look, I'm here, but let me tell you why I'm here. Let me tell you why I have hope. What a natural way to talk about Christ. So there's never a bad time. There's never a bad moment to talk about Christ. In and out. He has a stick-to-itiveness. He has a perseverance that is enviable. I know envy is not always a good thing, but I think you can be envious of good traits. He's willing to just stay with it no matter. He's not going to give up. He's going to keep on keeping on. So I need to learn that. Because sometimes, like everybody else, I suppose, there are moments when it's a little more difficult than others. I don't face anything like he does, but still, we get our moments of weakness. So learn that stick-to-itiveness that Paul has, that we talked about some from the faith. Yeah.
Sometimes the wheels turn slowly. He's been under house arrest for 2 years.
2 years. I'm glad somebody brought that up. We like things to happen fast, don't we? How many of you eat popcorn out of the microwave? Well, how many of you eat microwave popcorn, whether it's out of a bowl or not? Why? Because it's faster. I have microwave popcorn, but it goes bad before I use it. Because I buy that Orville Redenbacher in a jar, and I get out my Dutch oven, and I put a little bit of oil in it, and I heat that oil up, and I put 3 kernels in it. When those 3 pop, I pour in a layer, and then I put it in a bowl, and we salt it. Because that's popcorn. Y'all lazy people. The old-fashioned. Now, but see, we do that with lots of things, don't we? If I take a Tylenol and my headache's still there in 20 minutes, I'm complaining, right? If my grandmother knew that I would use 5-minute grits instead of 20-minute grits, she'd look at me and she would come down and beat me. So we all do these quicker things, right? In different ways. And I'm talking about food and things, but there are other things that we do that way, right? Can you imagine? Many of us in here were driving when the speed limit was 55 everywhere. And it took a long time. You know, I know 65 and 70 is not that much faster, but it seems like you're getting there a lot quicker now. But, you know, I was thinking about this the other day when we'd gone up to Amy's mom and dad's to pick blackberries, and, you know, we traveled that 55 miles to get there to pick blackberries. And I'm thinking, you know, it took me an hour to get from the church building to their property. An hour to go 55 miles. What if I was doing about horseback? Or walking? One of the former elders at parish where I was before this, who's passed away now, Wayne Currington, talked about when he got out of the Army at the end of World War II, the bus stopped in Birmingham. He walked from Birmingham to Parrish, Alabama. That's not a short trek. But he walked it because he wanted to go home. And he did. And didn't have any money to get the bus to come anywhere else, so he walked it. Now, you know, you're thinking, man, that's a long way. That's hard to do. But when I think about, and this all goes to this 2 years thing. We want things to happen fast. We want to get there now. You know, we're in the back of the car going, are we there yet? 2 years, Paul's still sitting there under house arrest. And then he has another chance to give a defense. The wheels of justice turn slowly.
Was all that time in the palace?
Under house arrest of some sort. Scholars debate he may have had a residence somewhere, but he may have been in a palace under protection because they knew the Jews were after him.
Afraid to make him a martyr by putting him in the regular prison? Probably would be the case. You know, even when he went to Rome later on, he would be under house arrest. And I imagine, what did Paul do for 2 years? He wasn't quiet. It's not his nature, right? He's going to tell people about why he's there and what's going on, and you know, he's got a prison ministry, you know? He's right there, you know? Well, what else? Yeah, you know, I really want you to think about this, and I probably should ask this question to some other people too. If you had an opportunity to go and speak with someone on the opposite side of the fence politically from you, who's in a major office, what would you talk about? Maybe not politics. You know, would you be tempted to talk about some certain politics that are important to you? Or would you spend that time talking to them about God or Christ?
If you go where now?
Some politician. If you had a chance to talk to a politician, what would you talk to them about?
Oh, I talked to him.
Right. Yeah, and we need to talk to them about political issues, okay? Don't get me wrong. But sometimes that's all we think about. Why don't we? You know, when I see posts on Facebook from Christians politically, I never see them posting, you know, if I had a chance to talk to so-and-so, I would tell them about Christ. You know, usually it's, I disagree with them, they are the devil incarnate, you know. Well, these people were. And what does Paul talk to them about? Christ.
One thing I find sort of interesting, I think it's back in chapter 23, when it's either the Lord or an angel speaks to Paul and says something, as you testified about me in Jerusalem, so you would testify about me in Rome. So Paul knows he's going to get there.
Yeah, he just doesn't know when.
When or how, I guess he could have just laid down and waited for God to transport him over or whatever, but he went through all kind of stuff to get there, you know.
Paul's going to use every opportunity he has to do what's right for God. In fact, when he writes to the Philippians, and I'm preaching Colossians this month, but when he writes to the Philippians, he's going to say something to the effect of, for me to live is Christ. And I've got a lot to do here, so I'm going to keep doing what I can as long as I live. And there's a lesson for us. All right, just a little bit more, and then one or two more, and we'll go.
When I think of Paul, I think of the word zealot. You know, he was a Pharisee.
Paul was one of those people that if he was on something, if he was on target, he was on target, whatever that target was. And I think that's his personality. And yes, that's a personality trait. But I think we can get kind of there. We can use our personalities the way we can use our personalities. Yeah. How do we think? Mm-hmm. You know, our pride is a real issue. And by our pride, I mean my pride is a real issue. And so sometimes we are defending ourselves and we're not defending Christ. And there's something to think about. I hope, one of my hopes in preaching through Paul this year, this is not an advertisement for Sunday morning sermons, but one of my hopes as we're preaching through Paul is that we're seeing this over and over and over again. The whole theme this year is crucified with Christ. And maybe you've noticed that every time we've quoted a passage, it's been about either the crucifixion or the gospel, because that's what it's about. And that's what Paul's focus is, I think, throughout everything he writes. I think that's needs to be what we learn to focus on. All right, the skit people are looking around the corner like, are y'all coming? All right, so thank y'all for participating, and I think we'll have skits now, and we get to see how good they do tonight. Tomorrow we have a shipwreck.